Larry Sanger is a philosopher who was in on the ground floor of Wikipedia. He got his PhD in analytic philosophy from Ohio State University, where he also taught philosophy, but he set the world alight a couple of weeks ago by coming out as a Christian. Here's my conversation about why an agnostic philosopher in his 50s would pick up the Bible and start to become a Christian. I'm Glenn from Speak Life. We like to see all things through the lens of Jesus. If you like this kind of content, please do subscribe to the channel. Here's my conversation with Larry Sanger. Larry Sanger, co-founder of Wikipedia. It's so great to have you on the channel. You wrote an article around about 2 weeks ago explaining your journey to faith. Was it a surprise to you that you became a Christian?
Well, yes, it was. It was a surprise to me how much that I became a Christian, and the response that I have had in the last couple of weeks. I really almost couldn't believe it. To be perfectly honest, I can even show you a message that I wrote to a friend of mine saying, "Nah, nobody's really going to care." I was wrong.
You were wrong, because you kicked off that very long article with a quotation from the old King James version of Mark's Gospel: "Go into all nations and preach the gospel." And it seems like you've done just that with this article. Tell me about some of those reactions that you've been getting to the article. From where have people been interested?
Oh, there's been a lot. For one thing, a lot of people noticed, and I think really fixated, understandably so, on one of the last sections of the essay, which is about my failure to start going to church. I admitted it. I know that I should, but I have reasons that are fairly idiosyncratic to me. But a lot of people responded basically plugging for their own denomination. So,
right.
You know, the Presbyterians thought I was a Presbyterian. The Anglicans thought I was an Anglican. A number of Catholics thought I was a Catholic, and so forth.
Yeah. Fresh meat. Yes, people trying to get their hooks into Larry. Now, I asked you to begin with that. Was it a surprise to you that you became a Christian? And I guess a lot of your background has been very, very much in the area of academia, and not only your history with Wikipedia, but you've been an analytic philosopher and you've taught philosophy at university and that kind of thing. You talk in your article about kind of methodological skepticism.
Yes.
Can you talk to us about what that is, for if that's the first time somebody has heard that kind of that phrase? What did it mean to you, and
Sure.
How did that impact the way you were hearing faith claims? Because you grew up in a sort of a Lutheran Christian sort of church background, but nevertheless, methodological skepticism was there as the filter through which you were perceiving the world. What impact did that have?
It's an approach that I took to truth-seeking, is how I would describe it. And it isn't my term. I was told that it is the correct term. Ordinary skepticism, or the best place to begin is with that. Ordinary skepticism simply says you cannot know that there is for example, an external world. In other words, there's some domain of knowledge, and a skeptic says you can't know stuff about that. All right. Methodological skepticism doesn't actually make claims about what is possible to know. It simply recommends the stance of not taking a stand on things that are insufficiently supported, and with the view of, at some later date, coming to a firmer belief, to true knowledge in the long run. So it is a something I would say that a lot of people with a sort of scientific outlook, at least classically, have had. Not all of them. Some of the advocates of scientism will simply endorse whatever mainstream science says. Whereas methodological skepticism says, well, we're not going to endorse anything at all until we have really, really, really good reasons to believe it, essentially.
We had on our channel last week a philosopher called Philip Goff, and in the area of consciousness, he's really made quite a popular stand now for panpsychism. And so that's really where he's kind of made his name. But he was an agnostic philosopher very much. He wrote a great book called Galileo's Error, talking about the scientific method as a method of exploring the world via this methodological skepticism inherited from Descartes. And that's a very good way of explaining physical aspects of the physical world, but hits the buffers hard when it comes to issues like consciousness, issues like the mind-body problem and that sort of thing. There are lots of questions that it leaves unanswered, and certainly for Philip Goff, he recognized that method of doubt was not going to get him very far with some of the biggest questions, like questions about consciousness and mind. Is that something that you found similarly?
Essentially, if you want to arrive at any firm conclusions, not to say logically or methodologically established conclusions, but just ones that you're willing to take firmly, you have to be willing to countenance a little bit of speculation. Let's put it that way. And I think also that it's pretty important, and this was important when I was studying the Bible, that I essentially bracket my doubts. In other words, like, I don't take this stuff terribly seriously. I'm just trying to understand what the Christians think. First of all, what the ancient Hebrews thought when they were writing the original or hearing the original words of the Old Testament. But also what modern Christians, or later Christians anyway, thought about what they meant. And I was just trying to understand that. And there's a certain approach to skepticism which basically says, well, if I'm not seeing any evidence right away, if I'm not really grokking anything that seems to be at all important, then I'm just going to turn off and turn away from the discussion. So I had separate reasons, I suppose you could say, to want to stick it out with my reading, with my study of the Bible. And it was the result of doing that, and simply trying to acquaint myself with the thought world of Christianity, or the biblical thought world. That really changed my my outlook on everything, ultimately.
Yes. I'd love to get there. Let's think about that in a second, about the way in which entering into the strange new world of the Bible changed things for you. But yep. I guess you were kind of teaching philosophy in an age when the new atheists were all the rage. This publishing phenomenon was rampant all across the Anglosphere. The God delusion, God is not great, all that kind of stuff. You, as a kind of an agnostic, did you align yourself in any way with that tribe, or how was that striking you at the time?
It's like I wanted them to make good points. I wanted them to be persuasive, to use the best arguments, because like I was familiar with them myself, because they're ultimately philosophical arguments. But I ultimately was very disappointed. At least the new atheists, as they're called, were mostly not philosophers at all. Daniel Dennett was the great exception, because he was well known and highly respected in philosophy before he became known as a skeptic. Sort of like in his later years, he became almost like a professional skeptic. But for decades before that, he was very well known in philosophy of mind. But anyway, but the point is that, yeah, I was not on board. I actually found a lot of the things that they said to be sort of a little crude, crass, a lot of low blows, even from people like Richard Dawkins, which was kind of surprising to me. And, you know, I knew from experience dealing with the people one-on-one. I mean, I'd gone to a dinner with Alvin Plantinga, who was invited by Ohio State, not for his work in philosophy of religion, but, you know, metaphysics and philosophy of language and epistemology and logic. You know, he's a great philosopher. He's like one of the great philosophers of the 20th century, 21st century now. And, you know, Christians only know him as this, you know, philosopher of religion, but he's better known among philosophers for other things.
Yeah. So you had respect for, well, you had respect for the discipline of philosophy, which you were teaching, which many of the new atheists didn't have respect for. Not only did they not respect theology, they didn't respect philosophy in so many ways. So
I should say something, though. I had respect for the philosophers of religion that I knew of, and that, like, I had taught philosophy of religion a couple of times in, like, 2004 or so. So I had respect for those guys, sure. I thought it was possible to be a rational believer, but I was not one myself, and I thought there was very little danger of my becoming one, too. Theology, well, that's another kettle of fish. I thought, you know, I didn't know much about it, didn't think much about it at all, really. I knew that it existed. Okay, this is an attempt to, like, systematize the Bible or something. I don't know. But I thought that it was basically an elaborate procedure of rationalism. Sorry, not rationalism, rationalization. Yes. So I didn't actually take that terribly seriously, but that's because I didn't understand what it was all about. And that ultimately is because I didn't understand the Bible.
Right.
So.
Right. And I think you say in your article that your students couldn't really guess where you came from when your philosophy was touching on matters to do with God's existence. A third of the class thought you're a theist, a third thought you're an atheist, a third thought you're an agnostic, and that was sort of a tribute, I guess, to your neutrality in teaching. So that gives you, I guess, some sense of where you're coming from when eventually you do start to think, maybe I should read the Bible. Like, why would that strike you as the next step to take?
Well, it's a little complicated. Like, for years, I felt like I hadn't really gotten a full education, and one of my holes was I never read the Bible all the way through. So there was that. But the previous summer, to make a long story short, a friend of mine told me, sort of tuned me into the whole phenomenon of elite pedophile rings. The idea that people like Jimmy Savile, the Rotherham scandal being covered up for so long. Those are just a couple of British examples. The whole British school system is rife with pedophilia, famously, has been for a long time, right? And then of course, there's the Epstein case, and there's the NXIVM case in the United States. There's the whole Pedowood, which is a whole series of scandals in Hollywood. And I could go on, but the point is, there are a lot of people with a great deal of influence in our society, and all around the world, in fact, who like to rape children. And the evidence of Well, I'm not going to get into it any more than that. Let's just put it at that. And one thing that he tried to persuade me of, he didn't entirely persuade me of this. I even now will argue with him about it because the evidence isn't perfectly clear. But nevertheless, a lot of the people who are involved in that sort of thing are on the record of being New Agers and occultists of one sort or another, Freemasons, etc. At least the people who are accused of it, right? And my friend said, I know these people, and they take it seriously, and it's like part of their sex rights. It's like, what? No, that's... And he said, you need to read these books. And the books that he was referring me to were books about the occult. Not necessarily the occultists' books themselves, but books about the occult. And I couldn't get very far into them because the occultists themselves say that the knowledge, the gnosis, as it's called, is itself powerful and will open up spiritual doorways. And I said, well, if there are any spiritual doorways, I want to keep them shut. Not that I took it terribly seriously that there were, but I thought maybe there's something to it. I mean, these people are undertaking enormous risks. Why would they do that if they didn't believe that it was true? And how could they, being some very bright people, right? You can't deny that the people who are accused of raping children around the world are not bright, because they are. And so they've got to have some reasons, if they actually are into this weird occult stuff, for being into it. Well, I said, well, at least what I can do is come to understand what they're reacting to, because what the occult is, to a very great extent, is a perversion, an inversion of the Bible and biblical symbology, and so forth. So, I put it off, I suppose, for several months. It wasn't really high on my priority list, but one, winter night, I was looking around for something to read at bedtime, and I thought to myself, well, there's the Bible. I could do that. I always wanted to do that, just go all the way through. And so I launched into it.
How long ago was this?
It was December 2019.
Okay.
I was converted in 2020, so I put off announcing it until I was ready to defend my doctrine.
So that's fascinating. There is this awareness of spiritual reality, and that not all of it is light. Possible spiritual reality. Yes.
Right. That's all I admitted at the time.
Yes. But even the possible dark reality of dark spiritual power was enough to make you think, well, it might be worth checking out if there is a corresponding light that this darkness is a perversion of. And it occurred to you straight away that the Bible was going to be your primary source of information on spiritual truth?
I certainly didn't put it to myself that way. When I started reading the Bible, I thought I was just learning about the Bible. I wasn't like abandoning methodological skepticism or anything. And so I wouldn't have put it to myself that I'm now wanting to learn about spiritual truth, and I was going to accept the Bible. No, that was not the idea at all.
It was filling in a blank in terms of your knowledge of the world.
I mean, the motivation was simply I wanted to fill in a gap in my education, first of all, and second of all, I wanted to understand what these occultists were actually reacting to, basically.
That's fascinating. And I wonder whether your reading of the Bible, with that background, you were actually more attuned to the weirder stuff in the Bible that a lot of us who sort of grew up in the faith, we kind of skip over the stuff about supernatural evil and angels and possession and that kind of stuff. And we
I did.
Yeah.
Okay. I tried to understand that on its own terms. Well, I tried to understand everything on its own terms, but yeah.
I love that.
I did.
Yeah. I love you trying to understand, because I've heard you give an interview to Sean McDowell where you talk about the supernatural ability of Sarah to give birth. So, in the Genesis story, here is a woman who's 90 years old, and suddenly she's going to give birth to the promised child, and how is that going to work? And what you said on that interview just fascinated me, because it sounded to me like you were taking the story on its own terms and thinking to yourself, well, narratively, how is this a consistent story? What is the coherence of Sarah at age 90 giving birth to the promised child? Oh, and then drawing the biblical links, the scriptural links back to that. And
shall I set it up for your listeners?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, Abraham and Sarah had been waiting for 30 or 40 years for a child to arrive. Sarah was 90 years old, and she had the pair of them had just received a visit from the Lord God in apparently human form, with two angels also apparently in human form. And he told her, or rather told Abraham, that he was going to become a father. I will return this time next year, and you will have a child. But she was 90 years old, and so she laughed. And actually, that's why Isaac is called Isaac, because it means, laughter. So let's see. There was a famine happening while they were trying to conceive, or perhaps she is already pregnant. It's not clear. And so they throw themselves on the mercy of a local king named Abimelech, looking for food, basically, and a place to water their crops and so forth. Not their crops, but their flocks. And Abimelech takes Sarah as a concubine, essentially. Now, he doesn't consummate the relationship, so to speak, because God warns him first about it. But here's the thing. She had to have been sexually attractive, but she was 90 years old, and she laughed because, am I going to have pleasure at my age? At least the pleasure of a child. No. If she looked like she was 90 years old, there's little danger of her becoming a concubine. So I conclude, I don't think I'm the first one to have this thought, that, there had to be some way for God's promise, a promised miracle, to come true, because she was well past menopause. So either her womb was going to be rejuvenated and made able to bear a child, or the whole woman was. Well, considering that she was, again, sexually attractive, as she had been in her younger days, now then, clearly, her entire appearance was rejuvenated, was made young appearing. Well, the thing is, if you didn't think about the question, why was she sexually attractive to Abimelech, then you never would have realized that was actually an important part of the story. And in fact, people who don't think about these questions, because, only true believers ask things like that, they come up with other explanations They say things like, well, this story obviously doesn't belong there. It's been misplaced by later copyists or whatever who didn't understand what they were copying, which is ridiculous. I mean, this is their holy text, and they didn't have that many at the time, as far as we know. They're going to treat it with great, great care. No, the reason that it's there is that it's illustrating that the miracle had taken place.
And that's a brilliant example, I think, of you taking the Bible on its own terms and seeking within the text and within the world of the Bible the answer to the questions that the Bible itself is raising. And what fascinated me as you were describing this to Sean is I was just thinking, isn't it interesting that the agnostic, skeptical side of Larry's brain wasn't being triggered at that moment? That what was being triggered was not, well, I don't have evidence for the miraculous. I'm not sure I can believe in the miraculous. It wasn't the skeptical side of Larry's brain that was being triggered. But it was very much a side of your brain. It was very much a rational seeking after coherence and consistency, but it was on the terms that the Bible was giving to you, rather than
right.
on the terms of the philosophy that you might have brought to the Bible. And I think that's fascinating to me.
Well, and the thing is, what I realized as I was going through that process is that many people had gone through the same process over a period of 2,000 years. It's called theology, and for that matter, even ancient Jewish, even before Christianity, ancient Jewish interpreters were coming up with their explanations and elaborations of biblical stories, making sense of it. And the Bible is very, very rich, and it repays exploration. There are many things hidden in the text that I've just given you an example. And I had no inkling that was the case. But of course, it isn't just like the revelation, the solving of a puzzle that was persuasive to me. That actually really had little to do with it. But it's interesting that it is, and that gave the Bible a kind of interest and hold that I didn't know that it could have for somebody like me.
I'm loving talking to Larry Sanger about getting on the inside of Christian faith, and when you dive in with both feet to the Christian story, you will find an internal coherence and beauty that draws you in. And we hope that will be your experience as you go to 321. Have you done 321 before? It's our online learning platform where you can see life according to Jesus. Based in the scriptures, we get to know who Jesus is, and then his vision of God and his threeness, his vision of the world and its two-ness, his vision of you and your oneness. It's all about seeing the Bible's vision for God, the world, and you. So go to 321course.com, start an account. It's completely free, and we'd love you to do that now. Anyway, back to the interview. So the richness of the Bible itself was the compelling thing that was drawing you to go deeper, and I guess incrementally making you think, I think the text has resources within itself that can satisfy the questions that I have about it. Tell me what was it about the richness of the text? Like what was it that was beginning to fascinate you as you started studying the scriptures?
Oh, there's a lot of things. That's a good question. Well, one thing is that occasionally there were some, and to a lesser extent, all the way throughout, there are a lot of interesting claims made about God. And whenever God was portrayed as saying something or doing something, I just said, well, this is the creator of the universe, and this is how God is being portrayed as behaving. This is very different, of course, from a Greek God who acts very much like just a horny guy. But this is a different being altogether. And for example, and that captured my interest when I got to Exodus 3 and and other later parts of the Bible, there are some interesting statements made that have philosophical import. So one of the arguments for the existence of God is the argument from contingency. It says all the events that are happening around you, all the things that are around you, they could have been otherwise. They're contingent on things that happened before them. But not everything can be contingent. We actually think that there are explanations that show that, if a bird flies by my window, it must fly by my window. And to make a long argument briefer, ultimately what we conclude is there must be something that is necessary in itself if you want to explain how all the contingent things can be understood as required by the order of nature, essentially. I wouldn't conclude, and this we call God, but the point is that there is a necessary being which explains the contingent things in the universe. Okay? How does God describe himself in Exodus 3? He says, I am that I am. So I tried to understand that. At first, it doesn't sound grammatical, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But I looked up commentaries and so forth, and looked into the Hebrew a little bit. And the bottom line is, what it means is, I am that which exists, or that which must exist. I am the necessary being. And another way of explaining it, and this is why Yahweh, or the name of God, is translated as it is essentially in English as Lord, is that he is sovereign, because a Lord is someone who is sovereign. He's like in control of everything, and no one is controlling him. This is also a reflection of the very idea of the necessary being. If he is necessary in himself, then his existence doesn't depend on anything outside himself. Everything else depends on him, and therefore, in that sense, he's sovereign. And you put that. And again, this is the name of God. And in Hebrew, if you say that something is a person's name, then you're saying what they are about, sort of essentially. It's their identity. Names are supposed to be meaningful in that way. So what it's saying is, what I am, most essentially, is that which exists, or which must exist. Well, that's fascinating. In context, that implies that everything depends on him, and everything that has been going on in the story before that and after that is like part of his design, the unfolding of his ultimate will. Now, I wasn't immediately persuaded of that point, but I didn't understand that until I had read the Bible and sort of put all that into context. It gave me a much deeper understanding of not just the Bible, but of the field that philosophers call natural theology, or philosophy of religion, the study of the arguments for the existence of God, and arguments about God, essentially.
So those arguments,
I had no idea.
Yeah, because you were first aware, really, of the argument from contingency with your philosopher hat on. And so, in a sense, at that stage, all you get to is the idea that, well, I guess God is not a silly idea. It reminds me a little bit of Blaise Pascal when he talked about in the 17th century and sort of a contemporary of Galileo. He said, even in his day, he said, men despise religion and hope that it is not true. And then he said we should do three things. And he said, firstly, I think to convince people of its reasonability. And then he
Right.
says, make people of goodwill wish it were true, and then show them that it is. And it feels to me like, as you describe the non-silliness of the contingency argument and the non-silliness of natural theology, at
Right.
least gave it a plausibility.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it. Yes, I had thought that religion in general was just pretty silly. I thought the Bible was pretty silly. You know, serious people don't really take it seriously. If people who are serious, like I knew there was some tension there because there are some very serious people who did take it seriously, and I knew that. But nevertheless, I thought they were just like, I don't know, enthralled to some bit of nostalgic, you know, irrationalism. Who knows exactly what was going on? I didn't think too hard about it. I didn't consider that much. Didn't take very seriously that there actually might be a way of understanding the Bible that actually makes really good sense of not just it, but of many other things in our world.
And I wonder how important those plausibility structures are, and how important things like the vibe shift is. I mean, on the channel, I've probably used the word vibe shift about 10 times in the last 5 videos, having not used the phrase at all. And I think a lot of people just apply that to politics. But what we're seeing, I think, in terms of the rise and then fall of the new atheism is a hunger for something that is non-silly, a serious house built on serious earth, as Philip Larkin called the church, and a desire, a desire to find out the story that our ancestors believed in, and at least fill in that gap in their education, which tracks so well with your kind of story. Can you talk to us a little bit about the ways in which elements outside of the Bible and outside of studying the Christian faith directly, how that has an impact on somebody who is making a faith journey? Because it's not just Bible study that brings you to faith, is it?
The ground was softened up in advance of the assault. Basically, a lot of impediments to my taking theism and the Bible seriously were cleared away. One of them. Well, let's go back a little bit. When I was a graduate student, sometimes I didn't even like to say that I was an agnostic, let alone an atheist. I said I had a no-concept view of God. I thought that we are incapable of having an idea of what God is, because what God is supposed to be is a being that created everything with a thought. Well, we have notion, and here I was sort of drawing on kind of Humean patterns of thinking. We have no experience of mind causing things to come into being. And if that's the case, then we have no concept of what God is in his most essential being. If the core of the concept of God is that he is a mind that can create things with a thought, and we just have no idea what that is. Like, our minds don't do that, and therefore I have no concept of God, was my conclusion. Well, I still believe the premises. I don't think that I can have an idea of what it is like for a God to bring things into existence ex nihilo with a thought. But now I think that we can say enough other things about God to hang our discourse on about God. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. And I never was able to answer that reply to me. So, okay. but I basically disabused myself of that notion entirely with the following sort of argument. 1,000 years ago, there were people looking at technology of today would think that we're doing magic, or we're all gods or something, like talking to each other across thousands and thousands of miles instantly, and so forth. It's ridiculous, they would say. Well, imagine 1,000 years in the future, a turbocharged, singularity-enhanced, AI-enhanced technology that for complicated reasons we can't understand, has what would appear to us to be a sort of mental existence, and with a thought, it's able to bring, I don't know, planets into existence. We're talking about, how about 1 billion years of development that extrapolates from the development that humanity has enjoyed in the last 100 years. But even more so because it's post-singularity. Isn't that possible? Isn't it conceivable? Sure. You know, I had read this book by Larry Niven, Ringworld, and that was about such a thing. That actually helped a little bit. And then I said, okay, well, if we can sort of imagine the idea of a creator of that sort, then all we have to do is go one step further and say, well, just imagine that such a creator was self-created.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, then you've got the idea. Yeah. There it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and so there is another step along the way in terms of the plausibility, the non-silliness of faith. There is Scripture itself doing its work on you, and you also speak about the personal side of things. That marriage, children, recognizing that we are beings in communion with others, independence upon others. And that love has a kind of a quality to it that sort of evidences itself to us as having this transcendent reality. Tell us that personal side of things, how that's sort of shaping your philosophy and theology.
Sure. This is a little more idiosyncratic than you make it sound. I, between the ages of 16 and 26, I was sort of a devotee of the philosophy of Ayn Rand. And she thought that all of our obligations, talk of right and wrong, could be explained in terms of our enlightened self-interest. So basically, if I should treat you well, it's because ultimately it redounds to my own benefit. Well, when I had a wife, and even more when I had a child, I reflected occasionally that I would die for these people. But whenever I had that reflection, I said, now, wait a minute. I can't really justify that in terms of my own self-interest, can I? So then that ethical egoism must be wrong. And I had never thought of myself as being a particularly selfish person. In fact, I'd try to be, conventionally moral quite a bit. And I try. And yet I don't. This was like a real counterexample for me. Now, Ayn Rand was an atheist, not just an agnostic. She thought that God did not exist, and her atheism sort of confirmed me in mine to a certain extent. It wasn't very important, but it was kind of. And I thought, okay, well, she's wrong about that. She's wrong about ethical egoism. And she could be wrong about other things. And I just sort of idly wondered, what else could she have been wrong about? Didn't think about it too hard, but that was, another brick in the wall removed, so to speak.
Ayn Rand did not have children herself, and when you look back to...
She did not have children.
No, she did not have children. And when you look back at so many of the leading lights of the last sort of 300, 400 years, I think Descartes did have a child out of wedlock who died very early. But you think of Locke and Hobbes, both of them childless. You think of Rousseau, who had children but abandoned them. And so many of these figures of the Enlightenment, and I draw a link. There might not be a link to be drawn, but if you're going to go about the project of man as realized in himself as this autonomous individual who is a choice maker, you are imagining the primal state of humanity to be this social contract in which humans are standing on their own 2 feet, and whether it's philosophically Descartes kind of thinking, therefore he is, or whether it's Locke and Hobbes and having I'm an individual making a social contract. Again, you're an individual standing all by yourself in splendid isolation. And I do wonder whether one of the great ways of just unweaving the Enlightenment enchantment that is on us is to just meditate on the fact that I was a child, and I came from being utterly dependent in my mother's arms. The smile of my mother was the first thing I knew. And trusting in a gracious reality that is outside of myself and coming to me and being told who I am rather than asserting who I am. All of this is actually very natural when you just think about family, and you just think about children, and you just think about the life of love that is the most fundamental thing to us. I don't think it's incidental that having children actually is a really significant wake-up call for people.
Right. Well, I think you explained it beautifully. I think you're entirely right. So
tell us. We haven't got long left. You've been very gracious with your time, and thank you for persisting through my technical issues here. But I'm not searching for a come to Jesus moment. I'm an Anglican myself, and so I'm very happy with belonging happening first and believing happening later. And I'm not quite sure when I came to Christ. It was either at the beginning or the end of the 1990s. I don't know what it was. But interestingly, it was probably 2 decades of a praying mother. That's probably the shortest version.
Same here.
Yeah, right. A few extra decades of a persistent mother.
I talked to my mother yesterday about this, and she and told her about how all the attention that my story has gotten, and that's the first thing that she said. I prayed every day.
Yeah.
And so,
well, every Augustine has a moniker. His mother was praying for him for so many years. But when did you decide? Okay, that's it. I'm going to identify as Christian. I'm jumping in with both feet.
Yeah, I thought of myself as a theist before I was willing to call myself a Christian. But it didn't take that long after that. Several things had to happen. One of them was I had to actually make sense of the Bible. Why the Jews, Deus absconditus? Why does God not speak constantly to us if he exists? Why does he hide? I had to really understand these things, which were great intellectual impediments, but I can explain them now. I won't, but I can. And all throughout this, ever since I was a child, off and on, not all the time, especially in my non-believing years, I would imagine conversations with God, or later it was just with some supremely intelligent, wise being, and have philosophical dialogues, essentially. Well, I started doing that after I started reading the Bible again, but at some point I had to admit to myself that these are actually prayers. and there might be something going on here than merely me imagining what God would say, although I think it's certainly mostly that. I don't claim to be a prophet or anything. And as they say, God speaks to you where you are. Nevertheless, that was a very important part of my conversion. This notion that I was able to have these sorts of conversations with God, sending thoughts to God, and having very clear notions based on the Bible, to be sure, of what God would say in response. And this I think creates a kind of reality, but it's more than creating a reality. I actually felt the presence of God. And at some point, and it just became stronger and stronger, to the point where I had to admit to myself, kind of despite myself, that I seem to be believing in God now. How is this possible? Like the very phenomenon of my own belief was, well, puzzling to me.
Yes, I often say that to people as they're exploring faith. If you look into the scriptures and you see that Jesus is Lord, it gets to the point where it's like, bad luck, you're a Christian. If you get to that stage.
I just want to add this: it didn't stop there, obviously, right?
Yeah,
I'm describing a moment that was actually almost exactly 5 years ago. And then over the next 6 months, and especially like a year or two, I came to understand the full body of Orthodox Christian doctrine. And to understanding it increasingly, connecting it with the God of the Bible and the God that I was praying to, and simply understanding the whole as a system, which I'm writing down in a book.
A very large book, I understand.
So far, yes.
and getting larger then.
It is for now. And maybe what'll happen is I'll try to publish a long version first and then a shorter popular version later. Yeah.
Amazing. And do you have a final word of wisdom if somebody's listening in and thinking they couldn't yet call themselves a Christian as you now do, Larry, but they perhaps even want to? What advice would you give them?
Doing the things that I did seemed like good general advice. So like reading the Bible all the way through for good understanding will help you understand so much. I have a young friend who I like to think I led to faith in God, if not necessarily quite the God of the Bible yet. He's getting there, perhaps. And he told me that he just like has too many thoughts when he starts reading the Bible. It's just like he gets overwhelmed and he has to stop and he can't go on, which is an interesting reaction. I think it's important to just try to understand it on its own terms as well as you can. Don't take too long. I mean, I read the thing. It took me like 2 hours a day or more sometimes of reading, but I got through it in 100 days. So that was a major commitment, but I felt really motivated. Well, I was motivated by the Holy Spirit. But nevertheless, I felt very motivated. I think somebody who's really interested in this and is seriously considering it should just give it a try. Go all the way through, try to understand it, use a study Bible, use other free resources. There are so many. Or just pay a little bit of money and you can get resources that are very complete and helpful. And you will probably be surprised, as I was, if you try to get your questions answered. If you don't try to get your questions answered, then you will definitely be left in disbelief, because that's just sort of the nature of very smart people. You find yourself with questions. You assume that there are no answers, but there are. That's the interesting thing. A lot of people have talked about the answers. And if at first the answers seem like nonsense to you, that's okay. Just try to understand them and keep going. And eventually they will actually, I predict, be a lot more compelling. But you don't have to start believing them on faith or something like that. That's not what faith is. This is like the last thought that I'm going to leave you with. This is a great stumbling block of many, many intelligent Christians or would-be Christians. And that is, the faith that saves is not assent to a proposition. Okay? It is a loyalty to a person. It is trust in God and His Son and the Holy Spirit that indwells you when you are adopted into God's family. So it's very important, I think, that you do all you can to understand things that you might not understand at this point, and bracket your doubts, come to a global comprehension of the Bible in its theological context, and then you might find that a lot of your doubts are not as important. The main thing is to put your trust in God, which is different from being totally convinced on every point of doctrine. It helps to understand doctrine. Don't get me wrong; it's very important. But I put my trust in God before I understood all doctrine. Let's put it that way.
Yes, yeah. Which is how all relationships work. I didn't get to know my wife with a clipboard and a pen and 17 questions, each more tricky than the last, which is why, the first year of marriage is always so interesting, because there are still very many unanswered questions, but you ask them from the inside of the relationship, that loyalty, that trust, and that makes all the difference. Larry, how can people keep up with you online if they want to find out more?
Well, I post on Twitter a little bit, x.com, at lsanger. Probably a better place would be to sign up for my newsletter on larrysanger.org. And basically all of the content that I put online is shown on the front page of larrysanger.org. I've got my own little cell phone social media feed called Sanger Feed, and people are welcome to reach me through that. You can post there too if you want. Yep.
Fantastic, and we wait with bated breath for the book to come out. But I've been so blessed by hearing your story and hearing you explain the faith in ways that I think will really cut through to many seekers today. So, Larry Sanger, thank you so much.
Thank you, Glenn. I appreciate it.